So when I, meet with buyers for the first time during our buyer consultation, if they've never purchased a home before, there's a lot to take in.
Yes.
What we focus on is we do get a lot of information for the seller, and I would love to trust entirely every seller and what they're passing along to us based on, the condition of their home.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they don't know exactly what is going on with their house.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another Workout Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for another week. Hope you enjoyed last week's video in our new Fleming Island office with Travis. We thank him for coming on, but we are back for the second week of June. We have a very special guest today out of our Atlantic Beach office, Casey Johnson of the JW Group. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, it's good to have you on. We're going to be talking a lot about home inspections today, but before we do that, I want to kind of just get a little idea about who you are, just if you mind telling us who you are, your group, and how long you've been in real estate.
Yeah, my name's Casey Johnson. I've been in real estate since the beginning of 2017.
Awesome.
My partner in real estate is Taylor Wilmoth, so we are Johnson and Wilmoth Group, or JW Group as we go by. We've been working together probably 6 years now.
Awesome. So how did that come about? Did y'all know each other before you became a team, or?
No, we were both kind of new agents in the Atlantic Beach office, so we had kind of a group of newer agents that came together, and we all just kind of meshed and learned from each other, and it just kind of seemed to be a good fit. Prior to COVID, when the real estate market was really cranking up, it was nice to be able to have some flexibility and freedom outside of the world of real estate.
Yes.
So when I went out of town, I had that one person I knew and trusted that could take care of my clients while I was gone, and vice versa.
Yeah. She
had probably more strengths in the marketing and making things look pretty and all that stuff. So that was a good fit for us. My background's in residential remodeling. My dad's a contractor.
Yeah.
My brother's a home inspector. So that's how I got into real estate. So we were able to
very nice
share some strengths and experience with each other.
Absolutely, and y'all been killing it. Y'all are top producing team in the company, been successful for many years, so it's a good fit. It's nice that your brother is a home inspector because, it's kind of what we're talking about today.
Yep.
Explain to me what exactly is that home inspection process like, and why is it so important for a real estate transaction?
Yeah, so when I meet with buyers for the first time during our buyer consultation, if they've never purchased a home before, there's a lot to take in.
Yes.
What we focus on is we do get a lot of information for the seller, and I would love to trust entirely every seller and what they're passing along to us based on the condition of their home.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they don't know exactly what is going on with their house specifically. So I paint the picture as like the home inspection is, we trust the seller, but we need to verify ourselves.
Yes. I like that. I like that a lot.
So, we like to get in there, hire a third-party licensed home inspector to get in and give us a little bit of a peek behind the scenes, something that we typically wouldn't see while we're just showing the property.
So how are you preparing your clients on what to expect when they're physically, or are they physically there with the inspector at the home inspection and they're looking through things, making sure that everything checks out? So how are you preparing them at that point to be like, what are you looking for?
So when I do my initial buyer consult, whether you're a first-time home buyer or a multi-repeat home buyer, I still like to do a homes through the ages kind of seminar.
Okay.
So I have, based on the conversation of where in Jacksonville, what areas they may be looking in, if they're looking at a historic home in Avondale or Riverside or San Marco or Springfield, I have a good enough understanding at this point with my experience what to expect in a 1910 home inspection versus what we should expect in a 1960 versus what we should expect in a home that was built in 2015.
Yes. So
Homes Through the Ages is kind of a presentation I've put together for my buyers and say, hey, if this is kind of what we're looking at, let's keep an eye out for knob and tube. These are the things that we're probably going to see at some point. Don't be alarmed. It was just the standard of construction or at the time.
Yeah.
But obviously codes change, building practices change.
Yes.
So I just try to set those expectations so that if they are going into their first purchase of a historic home, they're not super, super surprised when these old wiring or old plumbing and different, practices of construction are being presented to them.
Awesome. And then what are you seeing? What are the common issues that you see? You kind of talked through the seminar of homes. So in newer age homes, what are the common issues that you're seeing now whenever you're going through the inspection process?
So I would say on like a brand new construction home, most of the issues that we're seeing are typically lack of oversight on the subcontractors and building too quickly.
Okay.
I don't think most of it's intentional. I think it's just a lack of oversight. So honestly, anything from there not being power to a kitchen. They ran the wires, but they never hooked it up to the breakers. We do see active plumbing leaks. We see active roof leaks on new construction all the time. So even when I have buyers that only want a brand new construction home, I try to, preface all that with like, hey, it's not going to be perfect, and still put an emphasis on we need to do a home inspection.
Yeah. I think too, I've seen a lot of stuff of just how quickly Jacksonville has grown and all these master plan communities are coming out. So it's interesting to see that correlation between how quickly these homes are being built and just that lack of oversight causing some of these common issues. So it's nice to kind of talk about that. But what about walk us through that inspection contingency period and how it can help protect either buyers or seller?
Yeah, so I think it helps, honestly, probably protect both parties, obviously with more weight on protecting the buyers. There's so many things when we're showing a home, if we're in it 20, 30, even if we're there an hour, we're not going to see everything. We can't see through the walls. We can't typically get up in the attic. If it's on a crawl space, more often than not, we're not going into the crawl space.
Yeah.
We're looking at big picture stuff where we really need to get a home inspector to come in and look at the finite details.
Yeah.
We can't see the wiring typically of what's behind the walls. We don't see the plumbing that's in the slab. So that's where, the home inspector comes in and really helps shine a light on all those things.
Awesome. And then what if you're running into something such as pests? So if someone's gotten termites in the home, they don't realize it, or maybe molds started to grow in the home, how are you handling that?
Yeah, so mold's a big one. Pest control is obviously a big one. I would love to see every home under a termite bond. Honestly, even when homes are under termite bonds, there's times where we find termites, especially in the spring, when we have our swarmer season.
Yes.
That's when they're kind of branching out and trying to find new homes to get their mouths on. But it's important to do the WDO inspection. Again, it's part of setting the expectations with your buyers and with your sellers, depending on the age of the home, the location. Sometimes we find old damage and there's no active infestation. Sometimes they have a termite bond and there's still an active infestation. Okay. So between subterranean termites, drywood termites, powder post beetles, all that stuff comes into play.
Awesome. Now, when you're on the selling side and you're getting to that point of the inspection process, what's your conversation like with your sellers on how to maybe avoid anything that will come up as a surprise, something that they might not have thought to think of during that inspection process? How are you handling that?
I always recommend, or at least bring up and mention the opportunity to do a pre-list inspection, where the inspector will come out and just kind of do a quick once over. It's usually pretty thorough, not quite as thorough as a traditional home inspection would be on the buy side, but it puts us in a position as the seller and the listing agent to kind of navigate what potentially will pop up on the home inspection. The benefit to that being that if it is something substantial, so substantial that we might not have known about it, but if a buyer hears about it for the first time, it might scare them off of the deal entirely. Yeah. My mindset is that almost everything has a solution. Yeah. We just need to be able to address that and have the time and the resources to address it. So if there is something we can address ahead of time, even if we have to disclose it to the buyers, it's going to be to the seller's advantage. Okay. Oftentimes on the sales side, if you get an inspection from the buyer and they send you the repair request, we're working on timeframes at that point, pretty tight timeframes. Yeah. Oftentimes with these new as-is contracts, we only have a 15-day inspection period. So if a buyer does the inspection on day 7 and then they give us a repair request on day 10 or 11, it's hard for a seller to get quotes in that short amount of time frame. So typically when you're in a hurry, things become more expensive to repair.
Quite, yeah.
So the more the seller knows it, going into it, the better off they're going to be at the end of the day.
So you mentioned quickly, how do you handle a situation where something that's found in an inspection threatens the deal completely? Like it could just collapse it right there. How are you handling that?
So I think information is key in these inspection situations. A lot of times buyers are afraid of what they don't know.
Yeah.
And sellers are afraid of what they don't know. So if they've never come across, an electrical issue or a plumbing issue, they may immediately think, hey, we're not going to buy this house. We can't fix that.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I think most problems have a solution. Some take longer than others, to repair that solution, and some are more costly than others. It's every buyer, every seller is going to have their own perception of, how substantial an issue may be with the house.
Yeah.
I try not to ever feel like I'm pushing a buyer into accept something in the condition that it's currently in.
Yeah.
And I try to really just educate them on what that process looks like for the repair, what the long-term effects of that repair may be, and what kind of risk they may or may not be taking on.
Awesome. And what about, so from your end, what legal disclosures do you have that are pertaining just to you whenever you're in the inspection process? What are you allowed to disclose, or what are you required to disclose at all?
If I'm on the buy side or the sales side?
Either one.
So on the listing side, you need to coach your sellers that the more you tell your buyers, the better off they're going to be from a liability perspective.
Yes, absolutely.
Some sellers...
Please don't try and hide anything.
Yeah, I haven't ran into it often when a seller willingly knows something and tries to hide it. I've been in that situation when I was still working construction, doing remodeling, where sellers clearly found something and tried to hide it.
Yeah, or you try to do the patchwork themselves, make it look just neat
enough. We all run into
those
those sellers that want to do their own repairs. If you're going to take something on, if a seller was a licensed electrician and they want to do that, that you need to make sure that the buyers are agreeable to that.
Yes.
But yeah, if there's anything disclose it. On the buy side, oftentimes we get these inspection reports and buyers freak out and they're like, hey, the seller should have disclosed all of this stuff. And in theory, maybe, but I think the more you're in this industry, the more you realize that a lot of people just don't fully comprehend all the different components of their house.
Yeah.
Broken trusses is a big one because it's claimed as a structural issue to the house.
Okay.
In my experience, a lot of times when these trusses are dropped off, on the job site to begin with, they get dumped off a truck. What happens? They break. What happens? The framers go in, they sister a couple 2x4s to it. In their minds, we're good to go.
Yeah.
How often does a seller go in their attic to inspect for a broken truss?
Yeah.
Probably never. That seems to be a pretty common one that buyers, feel pretty alarmed by.
Yeah.
And in the reality of it, it's a pretty simple solution.
Then, so final question: have you seen anything, with your brother being an inspector? Have you seen any kind of new technologies or trends in home inspections that are changing the way they're done, or maybe kind of improving that process?
Yep. Yeah. So I think, in the full range of home inspecters that are out there, you got everything from your mom and pop guys that it might be a retired contractor, a retired plumber or whatever, generic tools in their belt. Some of the cutting edge inspection companies, one that my brother works for, House Scan Inspections, they are constantly looking for better tools and resources and technology to expand upon their inspection process. So anything from infrared scans, they use infrared guns, they'll scan the entire house, all the interior walls. It shows anomalies in temperature, basically. So usually if you see something cooler around a window or in a ceiling, it represents moisture intrusion. If you see something that's warmer or red, it could be a lack of insulation or a hot spot in the house that's affecting the insulation of the house. They've recently added... Do we need to stop for that?
No.
Okay, so they've recently added sewer scopes, which I think is huge. Some of our older houses, especially at the beach that are on slabs, we're in Avondale, Riverside. Most of those homes are built off grade. Yeah. So if they have the old plumbing, at least there's access to it, which makes replacing them a lot more, affordable.
Yeah.
At the beach, these 1950s bungalows with cast iron that's now 75 years old.
Yeah.
I put a huge emphasis on scoping the cast iron sewer lines. You may find old sewer lines, the Orangeburg, you may have the clay pipe run into the main sewer line. Typically, they're cracked, collapsing.
Yeah.
Roots have infiltrated the sewer lines, and it may be fine today, but there's no telling if it's a week or a year or 5 years.
A ticking time bomb.
And it's when you're on a slab, especially in, say, a flip at the beach, and they've remodeled the whole house, they put lipstick on the whole house, but you got to understand that you're sitting on a ticking time bomb with that cast iron under the house.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's been a great thing that I recommend for most buyers now, depending on the age and the location for the house.
Well, that's also a lot of very great information, I think, both other real estate agents and maybe potential buyers and sellers that do watch this video will find a lot of great information from what you've talked about today. So I really just want to thank you for coming on, taking the time out of your day to do the video. I always appreciate agents that are willing to give their time for these videos. But I will put all of Casey's and his team's Instagram, Facebook, their website, so you guys can go check them out further. Obviously, they have a slew of information that they can offer, so be sure to check them out if you're looking to buy or sell a home. But other than that, we will see y'all next week. Take care.